Casting now. So Zoom is live. Molly, it's all you.
Fabulous. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the second in a three-part series on bird sits and bird language webinar. Today, our focus is the 5 voices of the birds and how to spot trouble with special guest Dan Gardoqui, our bird language expert. I'm Molly Songas with Audubon, California. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll give you all a minute or two to get landed. And in case you missed the first webinar from last week on bird sits and bird language, we did email a replay of that webinar this morning, so you can find it in your email, or you can also find it on the Audubon California YouTube page. So check that out. While we're waiting, feel free to use the chat feature if you're on the Zoom or on the Facebook Live to tell us what's the first bird you saw today? What's out there? What'd you notice? Do you know the name of the bird? And if not, just what does it look like? Can you remember? And if you've done a bird sit already, how did it go? We want to hear your stories. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What did you see? What happened? Tell us a little bit about what you experienced. And I'll say from my bird sit this week, I've got this amazing red-tailed hawk behind me. You can see it in all its glory. And I was on my bird sit this week in a local park, and I was sitting down, and it was midday, and this gorgeous red-tailed hawk came swirling overhead, and this light was coming through and like revealing all the amazing pigments of its feathers, like where the light was passing through the feathers with this like creamy white and these like brilliant orange tail, and I was just awed. And it was casting this amazing shadow like all around the park wherever it flew. And that was like one of the main highlights from my bird sits this week. So if you're just joining us, we're asking you in the chat, what's the first bird you saw today? And do you have any stories you want to share from your bird sits this week? If you missed last week and you're like, what are you talking about? What's a bird sit? A bird sit is basically an outdoor mindfulness practice with a focus on birds. And it provides a lot of the same benefits as meditation and reducing stress, promoting relaxation, and really deepening our connection to birds. And if you want to practice with us, there are 5 simple steps. So step 1 of a bird sit is pick a bird sit spot somewhere really close to home, even in your house if you need to stay indoors. But in your backyard, if you have one, local park, stoop will do. Step 2, take a comfortable seat. Take a nice seat that you can sit in for 5 to 20 minutes and really take in the birds. Step 3 is awaken your senses. Activate your sight, your sense of smell, your taste, your way you're feeling, your sense of, what kind of soundscape is coming through. And you really want to get all those senses activated in a really simple mindfulness practice, or you can do any kind of meditation practice that you already have going that you really love. Step 4 is tune into the birds. And this is where we ask ourselves, what's going on out there? What are they doing? What calls are they making? What are they talking about? And it's an amazing practice. Even if we only have a few birds that we can see or hear from home, we can really tune into what's happening with them and really deepen our connection in a way that's in many ways even deeper than what we might have had through more traditional birding. Step 5, again, is just to repeat the practice. This comes best with repetition, and you're also going to get your deepest insights into the secrets of bird language, which Dan's going to take us into today. So again, those are the 5 simple steps. We invite you into a 30-day bird sit challenge that's happening right now through May 22nd. And you can join me for a guided practice on Instagram Live, Monday, Wednesday, or Friday at 1 p.m. You can find us at Audubon CA. But we really would love for you to join us. Again, a bird sit practice can be simple. It can be just 1 minute a day, but you'll get so many benefits from it. So we really hope you give it a try. All right, so without further ado, Dan Gardoqui, I want to welcome you. Dan is a bird language expert and the science editor of the book, What the Robin Knows, How Birds Reveal Nature's Secrets. He spent nearly 30 years teaching and facilitating groups on bird language on 3 continents. And he's an amazing mimic, which we're going to get a little taste of today and even more on next week's webinar on how to mimic bird calls. So he's going to give us a nice little variety of bird song today. And Dan runs Lead with Nature, where he does nature-based consulting for individuals and organizations. And you're joining us today from the forests of southern Maine. So welcome, Dan, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Molly. A lovely intro. Nice recap. So anyone who was here last week welcome back. And anyone who's new, welcome aboard. It's been really fun to sit here and listen to Molly do this intro, and I can see at the bottom of my screen this little feed with all these comments coming in from folks, and it's exciting to hear all the different places people are doing these bird sits, and all the different things they're seeing out there, the first birds they saw today, the places they've been. It's super inspiring, and just kind of warms my heart. Makes me feel really good about the world. And last few days here, it's been kind of rainy and cold, actually almost a little snowy, and it has been the most inspiring spring weather. And after kind of 2 months of some challenging times here, I was kind of letting myself get down a little bit. So this is very uplifting, and I'm grateful for all of you for showing up today, and grateful for you engaging in the more than human world with our bird neighbors. So my intention today is to share with you a little tidbit or two about the 5 voices of birds, as well as how to spot trouble, which is basically how to use birds to find some of those nature secrets that are revealed, things we talked about in the book, What the Robin Knows, with my good friend and colleague, John Young. This is not the end all of this topic by any stretch, and I am by no means the only person who knows how to do this or knows everything about it, because I don't claim to do that. That being said, I've put in many, many years learning and refining this skill, and I think I have some really useful things to share with you today, and I hope you'll listen, think about it, and try things out. And, also make them your own, adapt to see what works for you in your place. How do these things, or do they ring true for you where you are, your habitats, your birds, your troublemakers? So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go through a little presentation, and there will be some questions in there for you to be maybe reflecting on, maybe typing in. Some things probably come to you real quick. Some things you might just take a little while, and that's just fine. So without further ado, here we go. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to dive right into this little seminar. You looking good, Molly? Great. So again, Audubon, California, thanks for hosting here today. And for folks who are just tuning in, I'm Dan Gardoqui from Lead with Nature. Some of you may know me from my Learn a Bird series on YouTube. Many of you are here because you are supporters and fans of Audubon, California and other Audubon groups around the country, and or you just love birds and you're curious. So wherever you're here, however you're here, welcome. Some of you are watching us Facebook live streaming, some of you are on the Zoom platform, but either way, you're all gonna learn the same thing. So last week, we spent most of our time encouraging people to do these things called bird sits. And you may be wondering, or you may have already thought about this, why are we encouraging people to do this? And Molly's talked very briefly about some of the great, amazing benefits of doing bird sits. And one of which is they really do help with mindfulness. They really do help with slowing us down. They help with wellness in general, just like any outdoor activity. And bird sits also provide a forum for us to really engage in the natural world, for us to connect with our more than human world, our wild neighbors. And so we're focusing on birds today because they're awake when we're awake. They're interesting. They make great songs and sounds, and they have so much to teach us, frankly. So how do these things actually differ? These bird sits differ from, say, more traditional birding or bird walks, which may be the way some of you are here today. And that's also part of my background. And last week I shared some stories about all the way back from my early teen years, spending a lot of time with different Audubon groups and walks and bird banders and bird biologists, which is time I just love and still enjoy spending time with those folks. But our focus here is a little different. And our focus here is more to kind of blend in and connect with the rest of the natural world without really having too much of an agenda except connection, which really changes the dynamics. It changes the way we behave, we conduct ourselves, it changes the way we think, and even changes the way we feel a little bit. So it also changes the way the birds respond to us. And that's really big because we have a different intention and motivation, therefore we have a different body language. And birds see and read these things all the time. If they couldn't do that, they wouldn't be alive today. Right? Just like we do this with humans all the time, or with pets all the time, or other animals, birds are doing this with each other and all the other wildlife all the time. So because of that, all of a sudden it's a different kind of energy in my experience. So, you know, the difference between getting in a group of 15 or 20 people that I'm leading on a seaside winter seabird walk, where we've got scopes and binoculars and we're trudging away trying to keep warm, and I'm kind of talking really loud because the group can't hear me in the back. And we're pointing and people have binoculars and bird books and we get excited, and this is much more relaxed. This is much more settling in. And as we settle in, we start to notice distinctions. And we're going to start with what those distinctions are. So the first thing we notice is that when we're just those big groups and we're walking around and we're not settling in, but we're kind of making a big racket, we tend to cause birds to fly away. We call this a bird plow. This is what you might call, this is one of our bird alarms. It says that we're talking about is recognizing patterns in bird behavior. And this is one where all the birds fly away. So maybe you get out of the car at a parking lot somewhere, or at a, maybe you hop off a bus and you pop into a city park, and all of a sudden a bunch of birds take off the ground flying away. We are spooking birds quite regularly, consciously or unconsciously. Sometimes we don't even know. And often that's because of the fact that we're just not really aware beyond our own little bubble. So this is a little idea we came up with years ago called your zones. So imagine that we always have two zones. Imagine you always have two zones. And one of your zones is your zone of awareness, where you're perceiving the world around you. And one of those is your zone of disturbance, kind of where you're not really paying attention, but things may still be feeling your presence. As we're not aware of our disturbance, if our little bubble is small and we're thinking and looking down and we're not really listening beyond us and we're just kind of caught up in our own thoughts and our own agenda, we sometimes don't know what's happening beyond that. But we could change that. We can pull in that zone of disturbance and expand that zone of awareness with practices like bird sits. And that's why we're asking you to do that. Because by pulling in that zone of disturbance, we're more open and much more observant of kind of undisturbed behavior of wildlife. We just start to see more and learn more. So I want you to think about that right there, those little zones and that difference in how we conduct ourselves when we're outside. So think of some of your best kind of observations of wildlife, whether it's birds, other mammals, reptiles, I don't know. Think about how you were acting. How were you conducting yourself? How were you behaving? What were you doing before those things happened? Feel free to put that in the chat if you want. And, if you were just driving on the road, that's kind of a little bit of a different story, but we want to dive into that. But think about if you're outside, maybe alone, or somewhere you saw something really cool, something really interesting. How were you acting? What was it like? Now, as we slow down and tune into the birds, we're going to start to notice, we want to start to notice different things about the birds. We don't just want to say, oh, it's just kind of a wall of bird sound. It's just like when I start teaching people about trees in the forest or shrubs or wild plants, it's not just a wall of green. We start to separate out and learn the differences. So if we think about our songbirds, our most common kind of vocal perching birds, or passerines we call them, our common songbirds, we can break down their vocalizations, generally speaking, into 5 voices. Let's keep it real simple. They got a happy voice, and that would be a song. So that might sound like the scarlet tanner here on the East Coast, or maybe out your way, it's maybe you got a mourning dove. Right? So those are all songs. We call that the happy voice. Picture a little smiley face. Then we've got the chatty voice. Right? The chatty voice is often more like a, our little toeies, things like that. They're kind of chatting back and forth. These are also known as contact calls. So just a little chatty. I think that's most of the way most of us communicate most of the time with each other. We're just maintaining our social bonds, our relationships. We're getting things done, kind of transactional. Our third voice is cranky. This is a voice that's often associated with aggression. And right now, out in California, depending where you are in the state, such a big state, you've got birds that have already bred and had babies, and maybe some are on their second broods of the year or third, and some that are just getting going at the highest elevations in the most northern climes. And either way, breeding and raising young tend to bring out a lot of the crankiness in birds. And so you might have birds that are aggressive and they're competing for resources. You might have birds that are competing for a mate or competing for a nesting area or competing for food to feed their young. And that can look like kind of little, I thing that always pops to my mind is like, I can picture like going into like a market and there's like those little like house sparrows or little picture birds around your market and there's like crumbs on the ground or maybe some spilled bird seed. And there's a couple little birds and they're kind of wrestling almost, they're kind of getting right in each other's business, trying to fight over those little bits of seed. But as soon as you come wheeling towards them with a shopping cart, they're both gone. They're not fighting anymore because they don't want to get run over. They want to be safe. So it is a cranky voice. It's a voice of aggression, but it still means everything's probably okay in their world. Then we have the fourth voice. And this is one if you've ever spent time raising wild animals or even pets or little humans, you might be more familiar with. And this is kind of begging. This is when young animals are looking for resources. This is when they want to be fed. These can be a little nerve-wracking at times. Right up the road from you, have a great wildlife rehab center where if you go in during the spring or summer and then you go into the little baby bird room, it's overwhelming. Like, you can picture those little mouths wide open, reaching up to get food, right? Little wings fluttering if the birds have already fledged, following parents around. Those four voices are voices that tell you everything's probably okay in that world and they're just making a living as birds and they're probably going to be okay. And it's the fifth voice that we're going to give most of our attention to today. And that's the scary voice, the voice of alarm. So we got happy, chatty, cranky, hungry, and scary. We're going to dive in here. So if we think about happy birds, songs make us feel good on the inside. Generally, bird songs, birds that have these syrinxes, these cool vocal boxes that can make all sorts of, they're birds, they make us feel good generally, and they sound sing-songy. Right, repeated notes, form patterns, they're often complex and melodious, not always, but that's the happy voice, American robin. You get it. Then we have contact calls, right? We have this little chatty calls that go back and forth, and often they're very short and sharp, and they're generally used to maintain contact in a group. So say you got a little group of chickadees or titmice moving through your area, and you might get you make some like they're really short and sharp, little gargle noise. These are helping these little birds, our sparrows on the ground, whether it's your white-throated, your white-crowned, you name it. Short little contact calls, sometimes really hard to hear, sometimes very high-pitched. In this case, the juncos really, it's almost like a sit call. It's very, very hard to hear, but it's short and sharp and it keeps them in touch with each other. Our cranky voices, hummingbirds are a great picture to put here because hummingbirds can be very, very protective and aggressive, especially around food resources. They kind of like to bully other birds around, including other hummingbirds. And these are often kind of like those contact calls, but they come with a lot of action. They come with a lot of drama, right? Because a lot of these calls could be the same call. I could say Molly, and that's just me having a little back and forth. Or I could say Molly. It's the same vocalization. It just has different intonation, volume, inflection, body language associated with it. That's really sometimes the difference between these two. The fourth voice is pretty straightforward, especially if you have birds that nest in cavities inside holes. Those birds tend to be really loud and cranky because evolutionarily they've been more protected and they're able to get away with that, so to speak. Birds that are more exposed and out in nests tend to not be so cranky, but say if you happen to walk by and accidentally bump into that branch and the branch shakes, you'll often see the birds because they think mom or dad just landed to feed them. So in that case, you make this harsh kind of, I call it harsh, annoying, and repetitive because it could be very grating. It actually just it feels like it pulls on your parental heartstrings, your provider heartstrings. Like, oh my God, I need to take care of them. I need to feed them. So now sometimes these little guys, this fourth voice can be tricky because these birds are so focused on their own well-being that they often, or I should say sometimes, aren't really paying attention to what's going on around them beyond that. They're blinded by their own hunger, blinded by their desire to be fed first, to get to mom or dad first. And as a result, they might not notice when there's trouble going on around. And trust me, the troublemakers, and I mean no no disservice by that word, they know this and they take advantage of this too. We'll talk more about that in a bit. So the last voice is this voice of alarm. When there's something coming that's scary, when there's something sitting nearby that's scary, you better be able to communicate that. And you better be able to communicate the specifics of how you should respond to that. We call this encoded vocalizations or predator-specific responses. There's all sorts of words in the scientific literature, but basically it's a difference between when you say, heads up, if something is up and you want to look, versus run away because you don't want something to hit you. I mean, it's very important to know what to do in an alarm situation. If you yell fire, most people aren't just going to sit down. They're going to get the heck out of there. So the alarm is the one we're going to talk a lot about today. And in this case, you can see this beautiful raptor, this bird of prey coming in, and this bird eats other birds for a living. That's how it feeds its birds. So this is a bird you really want to pay attention to, and you really want to know when anyone else is paying attention to it. And you want to pay attention to that. So as people practicing bird sits, we encourage you to focus on this fifth voice, focus on them all, but this is the one that should get your attention the most because it should almost be like a break from kind of a baseline or kind of a peaceful background existence or a mellow kind of bird activity. It's almost like literally an alarm, folks. Like if there's a car alarm, a fire alarm, a siren, something that goes off, it should grab your attention. Those alarms can often be broken down into two groups, generally speaking, and they actually are going to sound a lot like the chatty or the aggressive ones, but with even more drama. So when a robin goes, kind of like that once or twice, it might be a call between it and another robin that's having a cranky fit with, but if it's like again and again and again, and you see it hopping around from branch to branch and looking, that's a little bit more than cranky. That's alarm. And then another thing that you might be lucky enough to see is what we call the seat call. And it's called seat because it's onomatopoeic. It sounds like really high pitch. Not sure if you can hear that, but very, very high and hard to locate. Very difficult for predators to isolate and find where the birds are. So these are really important. If you hear that, that means there's a predator right nearby, right? So I was on a conference call one day, and I'm on the conference call looking out my window, actually the same window I'm looking at right now. Right now there's crows that are feeding on my compost and then going and bringing food to their babies right now. But on this day, I was on this call, and it wasn't a rather exciting call. Maybe you've been there. And also there's robins feeding on the ground, and there's kind of the edge of the woods. There's some grass there, and they're feeding, and they're walking along doing a little thing and pecking out, pulling out worms. But then all of a sudden I notice the robins are frozen in place. I mean, it literally looks like someone just like froze them, like in time, like there's a magician. And I was like, that's weird. That's really weird. So I kind of snuck over to the window. First, I just kind of unmuted, I said, and I muted it back so they thought I was paying attention. And then I went and looked, and I looked up, and sure enough, sitting up in the tree is a raptor, is a bird of prey. And this bird of prey is just looking on the ground, like is looking around like, I know they're here. I just saw them. Where'd they go? And he's staring and staring. She's staring and staring and staring. I was the bigger of the two, was the female of this group, this species. And she was just like, you could tell, and the robin's slate-colored grayish brown back blended in perfectly where they were on the edge of the lawn in this dirt, and they just wouldn't move. But I could see one of their bills opening like this. And that little seat call was coming out. And that was saying like, don't move a muscle. Seat calls, they're pretty intense. And this is why they're intense. Because every day, a Cooper's hawk, a sharpshin hawk, a merlin, they got to feed their babies and they got to feed themselves with birds, and many of them a day. So that's something to listen for. And this isn't a voice, so we just tacked that on the end. But it is definitely something you want to listen for. Sometimes that alarm is nothing. And it's often some of the most intense types of alarm. So as you're out doing bird sits and getting to know your place and your bird neighbors, when it gets really, really quiet, pay attention. Hollywood knows this. You see it in movies. Storytellers know this. The dramatic pause. It draws you in, and it should. Over time, it's been important for us to know this. I'm going to jump ahead here. Now, I want to just sort of think about something. what are the most common voices of birds that you're hearing when you're doing your bird sits? Are you mostly hearing songs? Are you hearing a lot of that chatty voice back and forth? Are you seeing a lot of aggressive behavior with that cranky voices? Are there babies born making lots of begging noises? So go ahead and write in the chat there, yeah, what you think of. Maybe the bird and the voice. If you don't know the bird, don't worry about it. You can just say, it feels songy, or I think it's chatty. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to know all the details. As you know, how you feel and what the sound kind of, how it lands with you is actually just as important in this case as knowing who it is, maybe even more important. All right. So we just went over 5 voices. And now we're going to talk about when you think you might be in that 5th voice, you might be in that place of alarm, that something's going on that's not right for those birds. So those birds around you are saying, there's trouble nearby. And it might not just be the birds, folks. It might be other animals. It might even be other humans. But something's telling you there is trouble. You know, there's danger nearby that is worthy of your attention. And it's worthy of the attention of all those birds. We just chose 6. There's many ways to do this. Don't worry about the specifics here. This is more about pattern recognition. This is more just about kind of what's the gestalt, the shape, like what does it generally look like? So tell you a brief story. A friend of mine, we were talking about this one day, and you know, he was going to get a sandwich at a little deli somewhere, and he was pulled up there, and then he got a call in his car. So he's sitting in his car, and he was about to go in. This a couple years ago. And was waiting on the phone, and as he was about to hang up the phone, he noticed people just running out of the deli at high speed, which is very unusual. You know, this is like people used to go in and get a coffee, walking out to their car, getting a sandwich, whatever. It's in the morning, during the morning commute, and there's all these people just flying out the door of the deli, like really fast, you know? And he was like, what? And it just totally grabbed his attention, you know? And he turns his head, he's kind of like, what's going on? That's a sign of alarm. You do not expect that to be the baseline, the normal thing you see in that place. This is a pattern that stands out in that place. So maybe you have a thought about what that might have been. Maybe you might be wondering, what happened, right? You go ahead and make a guess. It doesn't really matter. You knew it was an alarm, and the key is that it was an alarm. Something happened in there that was disturbing, nothing terrible, nothing bad, no one got hurt, but it was something that was frightening enough that people wanted to leave fast. So as we talk about ways to spot trouble, let's think about some basic questions. You're watching birds and you're saying, are birds all flying away from something? If so, that thing might be trouble. Are birds calling their attention to something? Are they all kind of making a racket over there and they're all kind of pointing or flying up and around something that, you know, almost telling you something? That might be trouble. Or are they just being really quiet and hiding when they're usually not? That's probably trouble too. So let's break it down. A couple categories. We're gonna have trouble on the ground and trouble in the sky. So trouble on the ground makes me think of things like cats, bobcats, foxes, coyotes, weasels, could be badgers, could be snakes, right? It could be anything that generally lives on the ground that will interact with birds and generally eat birds or their babies or their eggs. So I was leading a bird language intensive, like a week-long course once in a place, and I had to come and go a few times at night to go back to my family. And I came in one morning and the group was already out doing a bird sit. So people are all spaced out and they were taking little notes and watching and listening and, you know, responding to what was going on with these birds. And I didn't want to go disturb them while they were doing that, at least on this day. Sometimes it's helpful to walk through and see how the birds respond to someone walking through. But I said, I'm going to let them be. And instead I went and I was going to say, hey, where should I go? I had 20 minutes. And I just kind of got drawn towards this place I hadn't been yet. So I started walking towards this little place. It was a little tiny seashore town that was dead and quiet because it was still just April. It was still kind of cold. And as I started to walk towards this place, I heard in the distance, dog barks. I was like, oh, interesting. But the dog barks kind of were moving. There was like a dog bark here, and then a dog bark here, and then a dog bark here in the distance in these different houses. And then I noticed the sound of dove wings as they flew away. And then I saw doves flying the same way that the dog barks were moving. I don't know if this makes sense. And then I started to hear robins doing their alarm and flying off as well. And they kind of were going up, making a noise, and then going back down. And I was like, aha. So I kind of ran ahead to predict where that movement was. And I sat down on a tiny little bench on the side of the road, this little bus stop, little bench. And I just sat there and peered into where I thought there might be some trouble coming. And I waited, and not 10 seconds later, and I had set up my camera with the video, and I kind of just squatted down low behind the bench, and right around the corner comes a beautiful red fox. And this fox is just trotting right away. And so I just kind of went, made a little squeaky noise, and the fox stopped and looked around and got very curious. So I did it again. The fox really started coming a little closer, and I just said, "Hey, it's me." And the fox turned around and left. But it was those bird alarms, in this case, those dog alarms, that alerted me to that trouble on the ground that helped me see something that I would not have noticed otherwise. And getting within, 10 feet of a red fox, I enjoy it. It was very nice. And I got to watch the fox for a little bit. It kind of took off, stood for a while, came back a little closer, took off again, and then didn't want anything to do with me. So these tuning into bird language will help you have these experiences where you get to see these amazing wild neighbors. So here's what it could look like. We call this one a hook because the birds are basically flying up a little bit and kind of coming back. Not so far that you won't see this. Like you can just watch this happen. Say you're sitting somewhere and there's in this case, there's a well-fed house cat walking along the top of a fence. And this house cat's, it's not really in hunting mode. It's kind of in whatever mode, cat mode. And, but there's a bird feeding nearby and it's like, I don't trust cats. And they shouldn't, because as many of you know, they're probably one of the biggest causes of mortality to our wild birds every year, cats that are going outside. And so these cats fly, this bird goes just far enough to stay out of reach of that cat's leap and that cat's claws and jaws, right? Just a little alarm, but it's something to look for. That can tell you something is coming, or it can tell you something's in the shrubs that you can't see, but the birds will tell you it's there. It might be something else. So that's what we call the hook. Another way to spot trouble, in this case, ground predators, is exactly what I just told you about in my story of the fox. And we call this the popcorn alarm because this alarm kind of happens in a linear fashion, both in time and space. So it moves along and it alarms like we showed. And over there on my left, say, there's this little, and then, or, maybe it's a, your California quail, try to do one, get that kind of call. And it happens again, and then all of a sudden they're up on top of the fence looking down and around. And if that animal were to stop, then you might get that and that little rally call to pull all those quail together to get safe. But if that animal keeps moving, it's just going to be the as they go along. So this tells you something is moving. And if you're interested, you sometimes can intercept where it's moving or just get a little view from afar or something like that. So we call this the popcorn because it kind of pops along on the landscape. So second way of spotting trouble there. Another way is if something's not moving fast, but is moving very slowly. And if you look on this slide, look at the body language of that animal. What do you think that animal might be thinking? What's that animal up to? Yeah, that animal's up to trouble. And what happens when cats are moving slow, especially, and by cats, I mean all cats. This could be a cougar, a house cat, a lynx, a bobcat, a Eurasian. I mean, the cat family, lions, well, they generally don't eat a lot of birds, but anyway, they could be. So all the cats have this energy of stalk. They're stalkers. They stalk, stop, listen, look, hunt. They're really good at this. That is very disturbing to birds, especially birds that are nesting nearby or birds that have family or friends that are on the ground nearby. So they are going to alarm they're going to be very vocal and they're going to actually point their bodies towards the source of the alarm. This was such a huge learning for me as somebody trying to figure this stuff out years ago. And I didn't have slides and stuff to learn it. I just had to learn it by watching and people asking me good questions. And I remember one time one of my friends was like, well, it seems like the birds are always kind of pointing towards the thing that they're upset about. I'm like, yeah, definitely. They're definitely not like looking away. They're looking at it. And so in this case, you often can't see it. And, in California, you have a great bobcat population in your coastal kind of prairies and open areas. You have a good chance of seeing them too. But if they're hiding between little shrubs and bushes as they go, the birds will tell you they're there. Whether it's those quail or whether it's, in the forest, in your woods, maybe it's your Swainson's thrush with that nice little that little whit call. They have this funky little alarms. Like our wood thrushes, hermit thrushes here do that as well. And they'll tell you something's moving along there, and then when it stops, it'll pick up in intensity. And in this case, these are multiple species all alarming at the same time at the same animal. So we call this kind of a parabolic, because it's almost like a parabolic shape, an arc here, and we call it the cat parabolic because cats generally cause this alarm the most. Okay, so there's 3 types of trouble on the ground, folks. Who are the troublemakers no, that's what to say on the ground, sorry, where you are. So who are the troublemakers on the ground where you are? Do you have the cats near you? Do you have bobcats? Do you have coyote or fox near you? Maybe you have weasel. Maybe you have mink. They all like to get in bird. Maybe you have gopher snake or rattlesnake. They cause some alarms too. Now we'll put our focus on the sky. And we'll look at 3 ways to spot trouble in the sky. The first one is really helpful. This is one that you could see anywhere, anytime. When I was first teaching bird language to a group of people I'd never met before, I made friends with someone in the group, and she said, I'm going to go home and teach this to my daughter. I think she's really going to be interested in this. This is very interesting to me. And they lived in the middle, I think they lived in Brooklyn at the time in New York City. And she said, we don't have too many birds around us, but we probably have more than I think. And I was like, yeah, you're onto something. Because usually we do. There's usually more around us than we even notice until we really put our attention and focus there. So she basically started practicing bird sits at her window with a little fire escape outside and a decent view across the way and mostly other buildings, a few trees, no parks even nearby. And she wasn't seeing a lot. But then when she would walk her daughter to school in the morning, they often heard a racket of crows. These crows, and crows would be causing a racket. And so one day she said, oh yeah, I never look. I just hear that. And I think about it and I don't look. So they stopped to look. And the birds were all circling around and harassing and making a loud noise. And there was something sitting on someone's fire escape. And they couldn't tell what it was. So the next day when she came out, she was ready. She had a pair of binoculars she borrowed from a neighbor. But there was no crows making a noise. She kept holding on to those binoculars, and it took a few days, but eventually when she saw it, she got to look up, and there in binoculars was a huge great horned owl in the middle of Brooklyn, sitting on a fire escape, just trying to get a little rest, because they're active all night, and they got to sleep during the day. And these crows would not have it. So we'll see this a lot. A lot of smaller birds will attack larger, threatening birds. And we call this mobbing behavior. It's literally like the paparazzi surrounding some famous celebrity, right? It's totally annoying. It's totally loud. It's totally distracting. It's very difficult for those larger birds to be at peace. So this is a good one to look out for. You could see this anywhere, anytime. Good one to look for. One that's not as easy to see, but happens a ton, but it happens really fast, is what we call the bullet. And this is when there is a very fast aerial predator. Maybe it's a peregrine falcon or a goshawk or a Cooper's hawk, a sharpshin-hawk, a merlin, a really fast moving bird of prey that is trying to catch, capture, and kill a smaller bird. Actually, not necessarily smaller. A lot of these big birds of prey will kill birds that are much larger than them, to be honest. A lot of these birds of prey don't weigh more than some of them just weigh a few ounces. Sometimes 5-6 ounces. Our biggest ones are just a couple of pounds, and they'll take out birds much, much larger than them. For instance, a great study out of the Southeast recently showed that horned owls are responsible for killing more wild turkeys on the roost than just about anything else. An adult wild turkey weighs sometimes 5 times the weight of a mature horned owl. We're talking 5 pounds versus 15 pounds probably down south. Anyway, they have a lot of power and force. Turkeys don't fly fast in a direction generally. This is more for smaller birds. So with the bullet alarm, you might have, say, where I am, goldfinches. I was sitting on a friend's deck one day. We're having a little iced tea, beautiful sunny spring day, and there was a little ravine nearby. And all of a sudden, we just saw all these birds flying right past us in the ravine, right over our table. And just instinctively, I just turned around to look to see what was coming. And there was a merlin, which is a little amazing little falcon, just shooting straight at us. Zipped right over our little table, outside picnic table, and chased those little birds. Don't know if it ever caught them, but that's a bullet. all these birds are fleeing as fast as they can. They've already been kind of caught in the open, and they have to get out of the way of trouble. So this is the kind of thing, you also see this in movies, where all of a sudden, like, there's like a quiet, spooky scene, and all the birds go, and they all like take off. Maybe you're familiar with that. That, you know, there's something instinctive about that where we know, oh, trouble's coming. The third one we'll talk about is somewhat similar, but in this case, it's like literally ditch. When there's trouble coming from above and you're hanging out on top of a tree or a shrub, you want to get inside. You want to hide and get into the thickest, gnarliest spots possible to avoid being lunch or breakfast or dinner or just an afternoon snack for the babies. So you want to hide. So often birds will just drop down into cover as fast as they can as these aerial predators who might be circling above or diving at them come in close. And so one day I was leading a bird walk, a traditional kind of Audubon bird walk thing. And it was early May, and I hadn't seen an oriole yet. Out here we have our oriole is the northern Baltimore oriole, and does this loud, super loud, clear whistle, amazing, lovely sound. They often feed in the blossoms of the apples just as they're emerging. And so we're in the woods for most of the morning, and we pop out into this beautiful field. And I know on the edge are these apple trees, so I pick up the binocular and start scanning them. And I see a bright orange thing in the tree. And I'm like, that looks like an oriole, but it's way up against the trunk of the tree and it's just squatted down. I was like, that's really weird. There's like down low in the tree is this oriole squatting. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait, well, look up. And sure enough, circling up above is a broad-winged hawk. Wasn't calling because it didn't want to be seen, but it was being quiet. And this broad-winged hawk is circling and kind of looking around, and the oriole is just hiding and just kind of looking up. That was just about, I must have just missed the ditch. So that was the ditch and hide. And all I caught was the hide part of that. And that bird has to stay there until it knows the coast is clear. And how does it know that? What do you think? Because it can't see everything. It can't even see above it anymore. If it's covered by vegetation and branches and flowers, how does it know? Who tells that bird when it's okay? It's going to be other birds. Or in this case, it was chipmunks. Our eastern chipmunk is alarming on the ground. Actually, for aerial predators, they have a different call than ground predators. It's more like a. And that once that little chuck call stopped for a little while, that oriole kind of poked its head out and went half a song. It really wanted to sing, and then a little more of a song, and then it came out towards the edge of the branches, looked up, started singing again. So these are some nice ways to spot trouble when you're doing bird sits, or when you're just for a walk with friends or family, or you're taking a break at the office or wherever you are. And I want you to think about, who are the troublemakers in the sky where you live? Do you know? It's okay if you don't. Maybe you can start to think about making up a little list. Do you have falcons there? Do you have hawks? Sure you do, of some sort. The Cooper's hawk's a great example. They live in just about every habitat. In fact, they do really well in urban suburban areas. They've learned to hunt along fence lines and, you know, sneak behind cars and follow the flow of traffic. I mean, these animals are very adaptable, and there's a rich abundance of food in our suburban yards and stuff, and backyards, and even in the city with things like pigeons. You know, there's birds that specialize feeding off of them, like a red-tailed hawk. So, but who are the ones right by you specifically? Take a chance, take some time to try and spot them. So, quick little recap. Are birds flying away from trouble? Are they calling attention to trouble? Or maybe they're hiding and being quiet. These are the three things to really look for in order to try and find out whether or not there's trouble nearby. Okay? You're looking, you're seeing all these movements, or you're hearing something different, and that should get your attention. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to Molly here in a second, but I just want to, before I do that, just tell you there's some other places where you might be able to learn a little bit more about this bird language stuff. There's a group called 8 Shields, 8shields.org, does backyard bird language course, and I'll be helping out with the mentoring component to that shortly. I've got a Learn a Bird series on YouTube that's a little bit about local birds, a little bit about bird language. There's the book, What the Robin Knows, that John Young authored, and I was the science editor on. Great start to bird language there. And then there's a Bird Language Basics, which is an old school DVD, and I think there's some online access too, that was also put out by, I think, H. Shields and John Young. But there's some places you can get going if you want to learn more and really do some bird sits. Join Molly on her 3 times a week little bird sit practices during the day. And, my suggestion is just listen to the birds. They'll tell you all you need to know. They're the experts out here. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Molly, and we'll go from there.
Fabulous, Dan. I love that series and I love those illustrations. I just think they're so elegant in terms of giving us a quick view into what these key behavior patterns are, and following those 5 voices of the birds. So we've been having a really active chat over here, and I want to open up the line. What questions do you have for Dan? What's been showing up in your bird sits? Do you have any just bird specific questions? And we've had a few throughout, so let me just kick it off with a couple that have come in so far. One from Jen saying, I love knowing where the predators are and really appreciate the scary part of bird language. I'm also wondering why this tends to be the primary focus. Bird language also helps us notice what they're creating, what birds are creating, like communities, nests, partner selection, boundaries of habitat, interspecies communication, where food resources are, etc. I've been enjoying holding these other focuses while doing bird sits as well. So I know, Dan, you really gave us a good impression of how we can notice alarm first. That's usually one of the easiest access points to getting into bird language, but can you say a little bit more about what else people can be keeping an eye out for in terms of what Jen has mentioned?
Yeah, Jen, thank you. I appreciate the balance and I appreciate the broader context here. There's so many things. We all come with our biases, and one of mine is drama and trouble. I just think it's interesting and engaging. And I have learned over the years, it's generally one of the first things many people often will detect. So that's why we tend to start with that. But birds have so much to teach us about other ways to be in the world. That list is endless. I don't really have much more to say than what Jen already said, and that I encourage people, like I said, make this your own. Go find out what is engaging for you in terms of connecting with birds.
Let's see. Dan, why do hummingbirds suddenly leave the feeders?
I'm not quite sure what that means, and suddenly a lot of that's a seasonal thing, or we're talking about like in a moment. Hummingbirds do everything pretty fast. So when a hummingbird is done feeding, they're not just going to sit around. They're often going to zip back to their teeny little nests, or to their perch and rest. So I think I need some more context to help answer that question. But it could also be that something else is frightening them. Hummingbirds aren't, in my experience, you have a lot more hummingbirds out where you are than I do. But in my experience, they're not high on the list of food on a lot of our bird predator lists. So they tend to, and they're so fast, they're so tiny, that they tend to do mostly whatever they want, or what other hummingbirds want or don't want them to do. So I need to know more to answer that question more accurately.
All right. How about blue jays can imitate a Cooper's hawk call that seemed to worry birds at my feeder. Are the jays doing this to clear the feeder so they can eat?
Yeah, so your Steller's jay out west, your Western scrub jay, our blue jay out here, many of the jays are phenomenal mimics. And that whole family, the corvid family, not to be confused with COVID, the corvids have amazing vocal repertoires and abilities. And exactly why they're doing it, it's a guess. I'm not sure. I don't know is the short answer, but they're definitely, I've watched many times, many different species of jays make calls of raptors, of birds of prey, and that will spook birds. And then the jay will sometimes just sit there and do nothing, or sometimes they'll come into a feeder and feed undisturbed. So I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel like they're just having fun. I mean, sometimes I feel like they're doing it with a purpose, and sometimes I feel like maybe the purpose is just to mess with the birds, but I don't know. I'm not a jay. Still working on that one.
Awesome. A question about, is it the males that typically sing? Can you talk about whether males or females are generally more vocal and how that impacts our understanding of the acoustic environment?
Yeah, so generally speaking, in most species of our birds, or birds in the world, it's the males who are more vocal in terms of song. Females are plenty vocal in terms of other things, and some females do sing for sure, and some birds duet as well. But most of the kind of territorial singing, the repeated singing in spring that we hear is very often the male birds. And those male birds are out there with trying to advertise themselves to other birds, both for attraction and for rejection. They don't want other birds taking over their territories, but they want females to know that they're there and that they're prolific singers and that maybe they have a good repertoire. There's a lot of theories about why birds sing different songs and kind of show off, you might say. Even like your song sparrows, which you have all over North America, very interesting bird with a very diverse ability to sing different variations of its song. And research has shown that the females tend to prefer the males with the most diverse songs. It's kind of like they're showing off, and there's a theory that, well, if they can do that really well, they must be really well fed and well healthy, which means they're really good at finding good food, which means they'll probably be a good mate and provide better food for our young. A lot of conjecture, but it's a thing. It's something that's out there. So yeah, we're hearing a lot of males singing and sometimes some females.
Fabulous. Let's see, another question from the chat is, why do mourning doves make that sound when they fly, when they take off and they make all that sound? Why do they do that? Do you know?
Yeah. So yeah, the feathers of the mourning dove, like a few other birds, a lot of our game birds actually, but some others too, are designed in such a way that as they fly away, the way the wind hits those wings and those primary and secondary feathers on the tips of the wings, it cuts through the air and makes a whirring sound, so with the mourning dove, that I can't even do it right now, sorry, but that sound. That generally, when they take off fast, and they also take off on a very steep angle to get off the ground quickly, that alerts other birds as well to that something just flew off over there. And you'll often see other birds peeking over to see, where's that dove going? What trajectory is it on? Is there something else coming? Or is it, and they don't all sound the same. A dove just taking off after a nice feed to go roost sounds different than a dove who's taking off to avoid a Cooper's hawk.
Wow. Do you have any suggestions for kids and sit spots, Dan?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I talked a little bit about this last week, but my first suggestion is just don't try and impose your rules on them. Just having a kid outside and encouraging them to be curious and just getting them outside and them seeing you getting interested in birds is a win right off the bat. That being said, you can set little challenges or goals, like all right, let's see how many birds we can spy on today if they're really into that approach, or let's see how many birds we can learn the names of today, or so I would say set little mini goals and challenges, kind of put out a couple of different baits or options for your kids to engage in and see which one gets them interested, and then go with that passion. And then if they get off of that, just don't worry, let it go, and just keep getting out there.
All right, what about another question? Do birds have different alarm calls for different dangers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the book, What the Robin Knows, I spent many hours doing a lot of research on this topic. They have to. I mean, all the birds that are right now alive have had, some of them millions of generations of ancestors that have survived to this day. They would not have survived to this day if they always responded in one way to, say, 5 different types of danger. Right? Danger on the ground going slow versus danger on the ground going fast. Danger from the sky coming up above in the trees. Danger from the sky coming sideways. There's encoded information in alarms that tell the birds exactly what they need to do. And it's not always just through the ears, it's through what they're seeing. And there may be other senses we don't even understand or know how to detect that are informing those birds on how to survive. But the fact is they have survived. They've made it this far. So they're doing so many things correctly, and they have so many threats in their lives, sometimes on a daily basis, that, they have a very, very highly refined alarm system.
Dan, your bird impressions are awesome in the chat. How are you able to perfect them?
Oh, that's a great lead into next week. So next week, we're going to focus a lot on mimicry. And mimicry isn't just a fun little parlor trick. It's a useful tool for educators, for anyone really. Kids have a lot of fun with it. it helped me learn my birding by ear by just trying to mimic and practice bird sounds a lot. So I'm going to share a little bit of some of the things that work well for me, and I'll focus a lot on a lot of the common birds in both in California and across the country, and we'll mess around with figuring that out. But the short answer is practice, just like anything else. A lot of practice has helped me, with the ones that are going well, and then there's ones I'm still trying to figure out and learn. There's some very complicated ones. I'll attempt some tricky ones next week on the webinar and see how they go.
All right, and speaking of trickery, we've heard that jays are especially trickstery. Can you share any stories that you know of how do jays be tricky in the world? What do you got?
Yeah, jays, I have a lot of respect for jays. Maybe about 5 years ago, one of my colleagues I was working with runs a great podcast, by the way, called Naturalistics. So Matt was one day, he was a bird observer, bird biologist, and doing studies where they had to go to nests and see what's going on with birds. So he spent a lot of time searching for nests. And jays are nest seekers too, because jays provide their children, their offspring with the protein of other birds, mostly eggs and nestlings. That's what they do. And so we were out preparing for a course, and he said, you ever notice that there's almost never just one jay? Like if you see one jay, there's usually another jay somewhere nearby. He said sometimes one of them's a lot louder than the other one and drawing your attention, but just keep looking and see every time you hear a jay, try and find at least one more jay that's with it. And that was a cool little thing for me that I hadn't really thought about that much. And it's been really helpful to kind of really think about, who's watching you out there. The jays are amazingly good watchers. And they will be watching this time of year where I live to see who's starting to build a nest. So if there's a pair of chickadees starting to excavate a little rotten tree and make a little hole in it, if a jay comes by, those chickadees will stop and go somewhere else. They don't want the jays to know where they're making their nest, because the jays will encode that information, just like when they bury a little acorn or something. They're probably going to come back and know where it is. So the jays are extremely intelligent, extremely good observers, and they will deceive birds in a number of different ways to their advantage.
Nice. That's a great thing to take to our sit spots. If we see
Yeah.
one jay, might there be another one just around the corner? Can we find the second one potentially?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A question from Facebook, Phil Harvey. How do I make my birds more comfortable around me?
I would say frequency. Just go out a lot more. Go to the same place regularly. If you are in the habits of feeding birds safely and cleanly and all that good stuff, that can help a lot. They get more comfortable around food. You could try the thing where you keep, you can sit pretty close to your bird feeders. Sometimes, there's some theories out there that if you wear the same exact outerwear all the time, like there's a thing where people make little mannequins with like the same raincoat and hat and pants, and then put it by the bird feeders. And then if you wear that by the bird feeders, they will sometimes just land on you. It's kind of a cool little trick. But I would also say don't worry about it so much. Just be okay being with the birds, and just don't worry. Just be with the birds and see what happens. And maybe that helps and maybe it doesn't. But if you don't mean them any harm, they usually eventually will pick up on that and be more and more comfortable with you. But like any relationship, it takes time to build trust.
A couple questions here about birds and eggs. And actually my neighbor texted me today saying that she saw a scrub jay grab another small bird from her front yard and caused quite a commotion, as we can imagine.
Yeah.
Question, do jays eat other birds and their eggs?
Yes, all the time, a lot. That's just what they do. And they time their nest, they time their breeding to maximize protein intake. And the protein they seem to have chosen mostly is eggs and nestlings of other birds. They are great teachers of awareness. They force other birds to really pay attention.
And how do cowbirds choose the nest they want to deposit their egg? Technical question.
Great question. So the cowbird is a interesting, beautiful little brown and black bird that is a nest parasite, people call it. But it basically puts its eggs in other nests, sometimes remove other birds' eggs. Over time, they seem to have learned which hosts are more gracious, accepting of their eggs than others. Some birds respond really well and raise cowbird chicks to success much more than others. And it seems like the cowbirds generally know this and do this more frequently. And so just like us, they have the ability to discern quite a bit in the world. So they know the difference between a common yellowthroat's nest and a, white-crowned sparrow nest. So they just say, oh, I'd rather go in this nest than that nest. And that's where I'm going to put my eggs. And, sometimes they'll wait for the right time of day, the right time, how many eggs have already been laid. Some eggs look more like their eggs and nests than others. And the short answer is I'm not a cowbird. I don't really know. These are all just theories that we think because we've studied them. But they've been doing this for hundreds of thousands or millions of years. So they've got a system there. It's pretty impressive. Works for them.
Advanced imitation game. All right, we got lots more questions, but we are here at the top of the hour.
Yep.
So we say, hold your questions, or you can post them in the Facebook Live and we'll respond there. And bring them next week. Next week, same time, same place, 11 a.m. Pacific with Dan Gardoqui. We're going to be diving into our third of the 3-part series, Mimicry, how to imitate common bird songs. We've been hearing Dan throwing down amazing bird tracks this whole time. And he's going to give us a little bit into the secret sauce of how does he do that and how could we possibly do that. And so don't miss it. It's going to be really amazing. Improve birding by ear, deepen your relationship with the birds, and give you some really sweet party tricks. In the meantime, we are in the 30-day sit spot challenge. Between now and May 22nd, do your bird sits every day if you can, even if it's just a minute, it counts. And if you want to join us, Instagram Live at 1 p.m. Pacific on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Audubon CA is our handle. Join us. We're doing a 20-minute guided practice. We'd love to see you there. And I believe, Dan, you might be even joining me today. Or soon.
No, tomorrow, Wednesday.
Oh, sorry, tomorrow, Wednesday. Yeah,
Yeah.
Dan's going to co-host with me 1 p.m. on Instagram Live. So don't miss it. And again, Dan, thank you so much for being here. Any final words from you?
Thank you all for caring about the birds enough to think about how we want to behave and live with them well. So appreciate it. Enjoy your bird sits. Take some deep breaths, slow down, see what the birds have to teach you. Listen to the birds.
Yeah, with that, may your bird sits bring you calm, connection, curiosity. Take care. See you next week. Thanks, Dan.
Welcome. Thank you all. Thanks, Molly.